He thought she was just another civilian in the chaos of the war zone, quiet, unassuming, and completely out of his world. But when a squadron of generals unexpectedly landed, the truth shattered everything he believed. She was not who she appeared to be. And suddenly, the stakes were higher than survival. They were about to rewrite history. The sky was a bruised purple as the sun began its slow descent behind the jagged hills, casting long shadows over the fractured city. Smoke curled from the skeletal remains of buildings that had once been homes, schools, and markets, filling the air with the acrid scent of fire and dust. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of artillery fire rolled like thunder, a grim reminder that peace had long since abandoned this place. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes crouched behind the shattered wall of a half-collapsed government building, his rifle pressed against his shoulder. Every muscle in his body was taut, every sense alert. His squad had been dispatched to secure a corridor for incoming aid convoys, but the reality on the ground was far messier than any brief or map could have suggested. Roads were littered with rubble and the occasional lifeless figure, a stark warning to anyone daring enough to navigate the chaos. Daniel had grown accustomed to war, at least he thought he had. He had served in conflict zones for years, seen more carnage than he cared to count, and developed a trained indifference to the cries of the wounded. Yet, tonight, as dusk draped the city in shadow, a strange unease gnawed at him. It wasn't the noise, the destruction, or even the constant threat of snipers. It was the feeling that he was being watched. Across the street, a woman emerged from the smoke, her silhouette fragile against the ruins. She moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, carefully stepping over rubble as if each step were a negotiation with fate itself. Her clothes were simple. A faded jacket over a plain shirt, jeans scuffed and torn, but there was something in the way she carried herself that caught Daniel off guard. She was calm, unflinching, even as distant gunfire rattled the buildings around her. Daniel's first instinct was to assume she was a local trying to scavenge supplies. He had seen dozens of civilians like her, frightened, desperate, scrambling through the wreckage for anything that might keep them alive another day. But something about her did not fit the mold. The ease with which she navigated the dangerous streets, the steadiness in her eyes, it was as though she belonged to this chaos rather than being a victim of it. He lowered his rifle slightly, squinting. She paused at the corner of a building, scanning her surroundings as if calculating the next move in a game only she could see. Then she crouched beside a fallen cart, lifting a bundle of blankets and small crates. Her movements were methodical, precise, almost surgical. She wasn't scavenging for survival. She was organizing, strategizing. Daniel's mind raced. Could she be part of a relief team? Possibly. Or perhaps she was a journalist, a photographer risking everything to document the war. He didn't have time to analyze further. His squad leader's voice crackled through his earpiece, breaking the momentary spell. "Hayes, hold your position. The convoy isn't cleared yet." "Eyes open," he acknowledged with a muted click of his tongue, scanning the streets again. The woman had vanished behind the ruins, but he caught sight of her shadow flitting along a broken wall. There was no haste in her movement, no panic, only purpose. As he watched, Daniel felt a twinge of guilt. He had learned over the years that war didn't just destroy cities, it destroyed humanity in small, imperceptible ways. Soldiers became numb, civilians became ghosts, and everyone learned to assume the worst of each other. And yet, in that brief moment, he could not help but feel a spark of curiosity, maybe even admiration, for the woman who moved like a ghost with intent. A sudden explosion nearby jolted him out of his thoughts. Dust and debris rained down, and he instinctively ducked. When the dust settled, he realized the woman had reappeared closer than before, carrying something small and covered with a tattered blanket. Daniel's instincts screamed caution, but something in her expression, her steady, unwavering gaze, made him hesitate. She wasn't fleeing. She wasn't panicked. She was moving with a mission, and whatever that mission was, it didn't seem to involve harming anyone. He stepped out from behind his cover, slowly, keeping his rifle trained but relaxed. "Hey," he called. "You! Stop right there!" The woman froze, her head tilting slightly as if assessing him. Her eyes were sharp, alert, yet calm, a paradox that made Daniel's pulse quicken. There was no fear, no pleading, no attempt to run. Just presence. She held the bundle tighter and studied him with a look that seemed to say, "I know what I'm doing." "You should, too. Who are you?" Daniel demanded, keeping his voice firm but not aggressive. The woman's lips parted, and for a moment she said nothing. Then, softly, she replied, "Just someone trying to help." It was the most ordinary answer imaginable, yet it rang strangely hollow. Daniel's mind flashed through a dozen possibilities: spy, rebel, undercover agent, but none of them seemed to fit. She looked too ordinary, too unremarkable to be any of those things. And yet, the confidence, the calm, the way she moved, it all suggested otherwise. Before Daniel could press further, the sound of approaching engines echoed down the street. Dust swirled as armored vehicles rolled into view, their silhouettes dark against the dimming sky. Soldiers in full combat gear jumped out, moving with precision and authority. Daniel instinctively raised his hand in greeting, signaling his squad to hold fire. The woman's gaze followed the incoming convoy. She didn't flinch, didn't hide, didn't even seem surprised. She simply adjusted the blanket around the bundle in her arms and continued walking toward the vehicles with a measured pace. Daniel felt a prickle of unease. Who was she really? And why did the arrival of these soldiers not faze her at all? He stepped closer, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. "Wait, are you—" he began, but the engines drowned out the rest of his words. As the armored vehicles came to a halt, their doors opened and officers in crisp uniforms emerged. Generals, Daniel realized instantly. High-ranking officials who wouldn't normally be in a war zone without a critical reason. The air seemed to shift, charged with authority and tension. And then, as the woman moved among them, something impossible happened. One of the generals approached and with a single gesture addressed her by name, a name Daniel had never heard. Yet it carried weight, power, influence, history. The woman turned toward him, her calm demeanor unchanged. But her eyes flicked briefly toward Daniel, a hint of something almost imperceptible passing across her face. "Watch carefully. You are about to see what I truly am." Daniel's heart pounded, his mind racing to reconcile what he had assumed with what was unfolding before him. This was no ordinary civilian, not by a long shot. And as the sun finally dipped behind the hills, casting the city into a shadowed twilight, Daniel realized he had just crossed paths with someone who could change everything he thought he knew about this war, and about the world. For the first time in his career, he did not feel ready for what came next. The convoy's engines roared, sending clouds of dust spiraling into the air. Daniel's squad moved instinctively, securing the perimeter while keeping an eye on the mysterious woman. Every step she took was deliberate, unhurried, yet somehow commanding attention. Daniel could not shake the unease that she was watching the soldiers as much as they were watching her. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air. A sniper's bullet embedded itself into the concrete wall beside them, sending shards of stone and dust raining down. Daniel instinctively threw himself to the ground, dragging the woman down with him as another round whizzed past her head. "Hold tight," he shouted, pressing his body against hers. For a brief, disorienting moment, their eyes met. There was no fear in hers, only a piercing calm that unsettled him more than the gunfire. "Stay low." Daniel barked at his squad, rolling to cover behind a nearby overturned vehicle. The woman's grip on the bundle in her arms was steady, almost casual. Yet her eyes scanned the surroundings with pinpoint precision, as though mapping every danger, every trajectory. Daniel felt a sudden surge of something he could not name. Curiosity, admiration, suspicion, all tangled together. She moved with purpose, yet seemed untouchable, as if the chaos around her could not harm her. He had seen many brave soldiers in combat, but few who carried themselves with such quiet authority. "Who are you?" he demanded again, his voice almost drowned by the echoes of gunfire. Her lips curved slightly, not a smile, but an acknowledgement. "I am just trying to help," she said again. But this time her tone carried a firmness that hinted at hidden power, authority he could not yet comprehend. A new explosion rocked the street, and Daniel was thrown backward against the crumbling wall. He groaned, tasting dust and blood, but quickly scrambled upright. The woman had already moved, stepping past him toward the convoy with unnerving precision, as if she had rehearsed this exact moment 1,000 times. Daniel shook his head. "This isn't just helping," he muttered under his breath. "There's something more." Before he could react, one of the generals stepped forward from the convoy, commanding the soldiers around him with an authority that seemed almost ceremonial amidst the chaos. The woman approached him, and he greeted her with familiarity that stunned Daniel. Her composure never wavered, but Daniel noticed the slightest flicker of recognition in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement that she had anticipated this meeting. And as the general spoke her name, Daniel realized that everything he had assumed about her, about this city, about the war itself, was incomplete. The sudden sound of a collapsing building drew his attention. A nearby structure, weakened by bombardment, began to fall toward the street. Daniel reacted instinctively, lunging toward the woman to push her out of harm's way, but she moved faster than he could process, rolling beneath the debris with the bundle still cradled in her arms. He hit the ground hard as the wall crashed mere inches from where she had been. Heart hammering, Daniel crawled to her side. She was unharmed, almost annoyingly unscathed, her composure unbroken. She looked up at him and offered a calm, fleeting nod, as if to say, "I told you, I know what I'm doing." Daniel's mind raced. Civilians did not move like that. Relief workers did not anticipate falling rubble and redirect themselves with surgical precision. And yet, here she was, standing among the chaos like she had done it all her life. As the dust settled, the general gestured for Daniel to step back, addressing him directly. "Lieutenant Hayes, step aside. She is authorized." Authorized? Authorized for what? Daniel's heart pounded with questions, but he swallowed them, sensing that pressing the issue now would be dangerous. Instead, he watched as the woman, still calm, still purposeful, walked toward the convoy, her steps confident, commanding. Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something magnetic, almost dangerous in the way she moved. And when she finally looked back at him, there was a spark in her eyes that promised revelation. But not yet. The war had just become more than bullets and smoke. It had become a puzzle he was desperate to solve. The city's ruins seemed to hold their breath in the fading twilight, a fragile pause between chaos and catastrophe. Daniel stood a few paces from the convoy, still watching the woman. Every movement she made was deliberate, controlled, almost hypnotic. She adjusted the bundle in her arms, scanning the perimeter as if reading the city itself. The civilians and soldiers around them moved in nervous patterns, but she was anchored, unshakable, a silent storm in the midst of pandemonium. Daniel's squad remained on edge, their rifles trained, eyes darting for threats. Yet he could not tear his gaze from her. Something about her defied explanation. Civilians did not carry themselves like generals anticipated their every move. Relief workers did not dodge falling debris with the precision of a seasoned combat veteran. Journalists rarely had the composure to remain calm as explosions tore through the streets around them. And yet, she had done all of that and more. A sudden commotion drew his attention. A group of local militants had begun converging on the convoy from the opposite street. Daniel's squad raised their rifles, ready to engage. The woman's head tilted slightly, noting their approach, but she did not panic. Instead, she took a measured step forward and, without hesitation, issued a single instruction in a clear, commanding voice that cut through the chaos. "Form a line along the eastern perimeter. Keep the civilians in the center. Cover the rooftops." The soldiers froze for a heartbeat, exchanging glances before moving to follow her directions. Daniel's jaw dropped. Civilians and soldiers alike obeyed her instinctively. She hadn't been given orders. She was issuing them. And they obeyed. Daniel finally found his voice. "Who are you?" He shouted over the growing din of gunfire and shouting. The woman's eyes met his, calm, unwavering. "You'll know soon enough," she said softly, almost cryptically, before turning her attention back to the incoming militants. The first shots rang out. Daniel fired instinctively, providing cover as the woman guided the civilians toward a makeshift barricade. Bullets ricocheted off metal, and the smell of smoke and gunpowder filled the air. Yet she moved with uncanny precision, never missing a step, always aware of every angle. She seemed to anticipate every threat before it even materialized. A stray bullet tore through a nearby crate, sending splinters flying. Daniel dove toward the woman, ready to shield her. But again, she moved with a speed that defied instinct, sidestepping the debris as though it were choreographed. He froze for a moment, staring in disbelief. Civilians didn't survive in war zones like this. Soldiers barely did. And yet, here she was, navigating bullets and rubble with the ease of someone who had done it countless times before. "Stay behind me," she shouted, her voice firm but not harsh, commanding authority in a way that made Daniel hesitate. He obeyed, realizing that she wasn't just surviving. She was orchestrating, controlling the chaos around them. Minutes felt like hours as the skirmish escalated. Daniel's squad fought valiantly, but it was clear that the woman's guidance was turning the tide. Civilians moved with surprising efficiency, soldiers coordinated with precision, and the militants were gradually pushed back. Daniel kept glancing at her, each time more baffled. Every gesture she made, every instruction she gave, carried an authority that no ordinary civilian could possess. When the firefight finally subsided, the street was a mess of overturned carts, scattered debris, and smoldering rubble. Yet remarkably, all the civilians were safe, and Daniel's squad remained intact. The woman stood in the center of the scene, dust and soot clinging to her clothes, the bundle in her arms perfectly intact. She exuded an aura of calm dominance that left Daniel both relieved and unnerved. One of the generals from the convoy approached her, nodding in acknowledgement. She handed over the bundle, a stack of medical supplies, to a nearby soldier. Daniel watched, heart pounding, as the general whispered something in her ear. She responded with a nod, then glanced at Daniel briefly, her eyes carrying an unspoken message. "You are about to see the truth." Daniel's curiosity burned. He wanted to ask more, but every instinct in his body screamed caution. Civilians rarely acted with such authority in a war zone, let alone commanded soldiers and civilians alike. He could not reconcile the image before him with the assumption he had made hours ago, that she was just another civilian trying to survive. The woman finally walked toward him, her steps deliberate. Daniel straightened, unsure whether to lower his rifle or keep it ready. She stopped a few feet away, tilting her head slightly. "You're Lieutenant Hayes, correct?" she asked, her voice calm, precise. Daniel stiffened. "Yes, how do you know that?" She gave him a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile. "I know a great deal more than you realize, but not everything yet." Before Daniel could respond, a sudden vibration shook the street, the unmistakable sound of helicopters approaching. Dust swirled around them as twin rotor blades sliced through the sky. Daniel instinctively raised his hand, signaling his squad to hold position. The woman's gaze followed the aircraft with the same calm intensity she had shown all evening. The helicopters touched down in the open area beyond the street. From them descended more high-ranking officers, generals, aides, and specialized units. They moved with purpose, their eyes immediately scanning the street. The woman walked toward them as if she belonged, and the generals greeted her with familiarity that stunned Daniel. One of the generals stepped forward and addressed the officers around him. "Prepare for the handover. She is authorized to take control of this operation." Daniel froze. Authorized? Control? His mind reeled. How could a civilian be authorized to lead a military operation? The pieces did not fit, yet the evidence was undeniable. The woman glanced at Daniel once more, her expression neutral yet intense. "Not everything is as it seems," she said softly, her words almost lost beneath the noise of the helicopters and distant gunfire. "Watch closely. You will understand soon." Daniel's pulse raced. This was no ordinary woman. Not only had she survived a firefight with unparalleled composure, but she had commanded both soldiers and civilians with authority he could not comprehend. And now the generals themselves deferred to her, acknowledging a power and responsibility that he had never imagined possible. For the first time that day, Daniel felt a mixture of awe, fear, and confusion. He had believed he understood the rules of this world, the rules of war, the rules of survival, the rules of authority. But everything he had assumed was being challenged by the presence of this one woman. As the generals coordinated with her, Daniel noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor. Beneath the calm exterior, there was a barely perceptible intensity, an unspoken command that radiated authority, intelligence, and experience. She was not merely a participant in the chaos. She was a force within it, shaping outcomes, anticipating danger, and managing lives. Daniel's mind raced, trying to comprehend the truth. Who was she really? A spy? An intelligence officer? Perhaps even a high-ranking operative working undercover in the city? Whatever the answer, he realized that the woman he had assumed was a civilian was in fact operating on a level far beyond his understanding. And as the sun disappeared completely behind the hills, casting the street into shadow, Daniel understood one undeniable fact. He was witnessing the rise of someone extraordinary, someone whose true identity, and the power it implied, would soon change everything he thought he knew about the war and about the world itself. The helicopter's rotors churned the air into a storm of dust and debris. Daniel shielded his eyes, the fading light casting long shadows across the broken street. The generals had gathered in a precise formation near the convoy, their expressions sharp, authoritative, yet tinged with an unusual deference. Daniel watched, heart hammering as the woman stepped forward to meet them, her movements fluid and composed, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. Daniel had witnessed many things in his career, gunfights, ambushes, betrayals, but nothing prepared him for what happened next. The general closest to her spoke first, his voice carrying across the wind. "Lieutenant Hayes," he began, his tone formal yet commanding, "you are witnessing a critical operation. And this woman, is not who you think she is." Daniel frowned, confusion and suspicion warring in his chest. "What do you mean?" he shouted, stepping closer, though instinct told him to stay back. The general's gaze shifted to her, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. Then, with a voice that carried authority and weight, the general announced, "This is Colonel Emilia Vaughn, Chief Operative of the International Strategic Intelligence Unit. She has been undercover for the past 5 years, embedded in conflict zones and high-risk operations around the globe. Her assignment here was critical to national and international security. She is authorized to take control of all ongoing operations in this sector." The words hit Daniel like a thunderclap. Colonel Emilia Vaughn, Chief Operative? The woman he had assumed was a fragile, unassuming civilian, someone who blended into the ruins, was in fact a high-ranking intelligence officer with power and authority that dwarfed anything he had ever encountered. Daniel staggered backward, his mind struggling to catch up. "But she's just a civilian. I saw her. I mean, she—" His words faltered, his thoughts jumbled by the revelation. The calm, measured woman who had navigated bullets, directed civilians, and commanded soldiers was now something else entirely. Emilia turned toward him, her expression serene but commanding. "Lieutenant Hayes," she said, her tone neither patronizing nor cold, "I understand your confusion. You judged me based on appearances and assumptions. That is natural. But my role here required that I remain indistinguishable from a civilian until the moment of revelation. The city, the civilians, the conflict, everything depended on my ability to operate without drawing attention." Daniel's mind reeled. He wanted to speak, to question, to challenge her, but the weight of her presence and the general's deference rendered him silent. Every instinct in his body screamed both awe and fear. He had always believed civilians were vulnerable, ordinary, powerless. And yet, here stood one who commanded armies, navigated chaos, and shaped the course of events with precision he could barely comprehend. One of the generals stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Emilia's shoulder. "Colonel Vaughn has single-handedly ensured the safety of countless civilians today," he said. "Her actions prevented a catastrophic ambush and secured this sector for ongoing humanitarian operations. Lieutenant Hayes, you have witnessed firsthand her skill, leadership, and courage under fire." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. He remembered the moments earlier, the way she had moved through falling debris, how she had directed soldiers and civilians alike, how she had carried herself with absolute control while danger surrounded them. Each moment now took on a new meaning, framed by the knowledge of who she truly was. Emilia's gaze met his again, unwavering. "You may have thought I was just another civilian, Lieutenant. That was intentional. The world rarely prepares itself to recognize true authority hidden in plain sight. Today, you saw the difference between assumption and reality, between perception and truth." Daniel's head spun. Everything he had believed, the rules of war, the hierarchy, even his own sense of judgment, was being challenged. He had been deceived, yes, but not maliciously. Rather, he had been a witness to something extraordinary, a demonstration of competence, courage, and intelligence far beyond the ordinary. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel finally asked, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "Why let me think you were just a civilian?" Emilia's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "Because assumptions are powerful, Lieutenant, and the mission required that you and others react naturally, without bias, without expectation. I had to be observed as I truly am only when the consequences mattered most. Today, you observed the operation in its purest form." Daniel struggled to form coherent thoughts. He had faced war, deception, and betrayal before, but nothing like this. Here was a woman who had not only survived unimaginable danger but had controlled it, mastered it, and used it to save lives while remaining undetected until the perfect moment. He looked at her again, taking in the dust on her jacket, the faint scratches on her hands, the calm authority radiating from her. This was not a civilian, not a mere observer. She was a force, a strategist, a guardian in human form. And she had allowed him to see only fragments of her reality, enough to understand her competence but not enough to grasp the full extent of her reach. The generals began to issue further orders, but all Daniel could focus on was Emilia. He realized, with a mix of humility and astonishment, that everything he had believed about appearances, identity, and authority was flawed. Judgment based on superficial perception could be dangerously misleading. And now he understood why she had remained anonymous for so long. As the helicopters lifted again, taking some of the generals and specialized units to their next destination, Daniel remained rooted to the spot, watching Emilia coordinate the remaining operations. He saw a woman in control of chaos, not through brute force but through intelligence, foresight, and unwavering confidence. She had turned assumptions upside down, and in doing so, had reshaped his understanding of what leadership truly meant. Finally, she turned to him one last time, her expression softer but still commanding. "Lieutenant Hayes," she said, "you will remember today, not for what you thought you knew, but for what you saw, and for the difference one person can make when they embrace their true purpose." Daniel nodded, words failing him. He could not articulate the mixture of respect, awe, and disbelief that roiled within him. He had thought she was a civilian. He had been wrong, and in that moment he realized that being wrong had never felt so enlightening, or so humbling. The sun had fully disappeared now, leaving the city bathed in shadow and flickering lamplight. The echoes of helicopters and distant gunfire lingered in the air, a reminder that danger was never far away. But Daniel no longer saw the world in the same way. He had glimpsed a truth hidden in plain sight, that identity, power, and courage were not always obvious. Sometimes they were hidden beneath quiet composure, behind calm eyes, and in the deliberate actions of someone who refused to be underestimated. And as Emilia continued her work, moving with purpose and authority, Daniel finally understood. He had not just encountered a civilian, a soldier, or an operative. He had witnessed someone extraordinary, someone whose presence alone could reshape the course of events. And that knowledge, terrifying and inspiring in equal measure, would remain with him forever. The city's ruins had fallen into a strange calm, a momentary lull between chaos and the unknown. Helicopters had lifted away, generals had departed to coordinate further operations, and the militants had been driven back, their advance stalled. Dust hung in the air, mixing with the faint smell of smoke, metal, and earth. In the center of it all stood Emilia Vaughn, calm, composed, authoritative, her presence commanding without a word. Daniel Hayes moved slowly toward her, his steps tentative. The adrenaline from the firefight still coursed through his veins, but now it was mingled with awe and reflection. He had witnessed courage before. He had seen soldiers lead and civilians fight for survival. But what he had seen today transcended both. Emilia was a master of the unseen, the hidden, the calculated. She had operated in the shadows, yet her actions had reshaped the battlefield with precision and foresight. "Colonel Vaughn," Daniel said, his voice steady but reverent. I don't know what to say." She turned to him, her expression softening ever so slightly, though her posture remained impeccable. "Lieutenant Hayes," she said, "there's no need for words. Today was about action, observation, and survival. Words are secondary." Daniel shook his head, struggling to organize his thoughts. "No, you don't understand. You changed everything I thought I knew. I thought you were a civilian. I assumed you were just someone caught in the crossfire. And now I know that assumption was completely wrong. She held up a hand, silencing him gently. "Assumptions are dangerous in conflict," she said. "They cloud judgment, distort reality, and put lives at risk. Today, you learned the consequences of believing only what you see on the surface. You saw me as a civilian, but the truth was far deeper. That lesson, Lieutenant, is what matters." Daniel absorbed her words, feeling a humbling mix of admiration and introspection. He realized how often he had judged situations and people superficially, letting appearances dictate his decisions. Emilia had forced him to confront that bias, not with confrontation, but with demonstration. Calm, methodical, undeniable. "I see that now," Daniel admitted softly, "and I respect it. You're extraordinary, not just for what you did, but for how you did it. You led, protected, and controlled everything without anyone realizing it until it was too late to doubt you." Emilia's gaze met his, unwavering yet thoughtful. "Leadership is not about recognition, Lieutenant. It is about responsibility, foresight, and the willingness to act decisively when others hesitate. Today, you witnessed leadership in its purest form, not for accolades, not for attention, but for results." Daniel nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always prided himself on discipline, courage, and competence. Yet he realized that those traits alone were insufficient. True influence, he understood now, required subtlety, awareness, and the ability to see the unseen, the very qualities Emilia exemplified. The city around them was quiet now, but the faint rumble of distant conflict reminded Daniel that peace was fleeting. Yet, in this brief moment of respite, he felt a transformation within himself. He would never look at the world, or the people in it, the same way again. Civilians could be more capable than he imagined. Operatives could wield authority without formal recognition. And one person, operating with clarity and purpose, could alter outcomes far beyond what seemed possible. Emilia adjusted the bundle in her arms, ensuring the supplies were accounted for. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice carrying a note of finality, "the mission here is not yet complete, but your role has been noted. Observation, awareness, and adaptability are critical. Remember what you saw today." Daniel felt a surge of resolve. "I will," he promised. "And thank you for showing me the truth, for saving lives, for everything." She inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. "Courage and diligence are commendable, Lieutenant Hayes. You acted with integrity and skill under pressure. That is as important as any strategy or rank. Do not forget it." As she turned to coordinate the remaining operations, Daniel remained where he stood, taking in the scene. Soldiers and civilians moved with newfound coordination, guided by subtle instructions and silent authority, some of which came from Emilia herself. Daniel realized that today had been more than a battle. It had been a lesson in perception, judgment, and the power of presence. Hours later, as the sun rose behind the hills and cast pale light across the battered streets, Daniel found himself reflecting on the events of the previous day. The fear, confusion, and adrenaline had faded, leaving a clarity that was almost dizzying. He understood now that assumptions were the enemy of truth, and that appearances could be as deceptive as they were comforting. Emilia Vaughn had demonstrated what it meant to embrace one's identity fully, to wield power responsibly, and to act with precision and foresight. Daniel felt a quiet determination settle in him. He would carry this lesson forward, not only in the battlefield, but in every judgment he made, every decision he took, every life he touched. He had thought she was a civilian. He had assumed weakness, ordinariness, invisibility. And he had been wrong. In that mistake lay his awakening. He had witnessed courage concealed in calmness, authority hidden in quiet composure, and intelligence operating with surgical precision. Daniel finally allowed himself a deep breath, the kind that comes after surviving chaos and witnessing something extraordinary. He felt transformed, not in skill alone, but in perspective, in understanding, and in humility. The world, he realized, was larger and more complex than his assumptions allowed, and the people within it were capable of far more than appearances suggested. As he watched Emilia coordinate the last of the civilians and soldiers, guiding them with the same unwavering authority, Daniel felt a profound sense of respect and gratitude. Not only had she saved lives, but she had also reshaped his understanding of courage, leadership, and identity. And though the city remained scarred, he knew that in this quiet moment, amidst the ruins and lingering dust, he had witnessed something rare, something extraordinary. The true measure of a leader, hidden in plain sight, revealed only when the moment demanded it. For Lieutenant Daniel Hayes, the lesson was clear, unforgettable, and deeply personal. He would never again mistake appearances for reality, nor underestimate the quiet force of someone operating with purpose and vision. And somewhere in the shadows of the city, Emilia Vaughn continued her mission, a reminder that power, courage, and authority were often concealed, waiting for the moment to change everything.